Hi guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Artist Overviews. On today's overview, we'll be talking about Leadbelly. Leadbelly was a folk and blues artist, born in 1888 in Morinsport, Louisiana. He had one sibling, and he didn't even attend school because he was born into poverty. Despite being born in Louisiana, he moved to Texas very young, and it was actually in Texas where he began to get a knack for playing instruments. In 1908, he received his first instrument as a gift, which was an accordion. However, he was already well versed in playing guitar and piano, and in just a few years, he'd be performing shows at St. Paul's Bottoms between the years of 1915 and 1939. He also went to jail on many different occasions, regularly getting into tussles with the law. Some of the things he went to jail for was made up of carrying a pistol, fighting, assault, stabbing, and shooting and murder. Which, by the way, I should give a disclaimer. I don't condone any of those things. It was in prison that he was discovered and formed a pivotal friendship with John Lomax and his son Alan. Lomax was eager to record Leadbelly and brought him in, or actually came to the prison to record his songs in 1933 and 34. Through those recordings, he got several singles, and he also helped Leadbelly in multiple other ways as well. Since Leadbelly was an ex-convict, and it was the Great Depression, jobs were very difficult to find, and he worked for John as a driver, and went with him regularly to different gigs, or just to go visit artists that he was also looking to record. In 1935, at 57 years old, Leadbelly had his first recordings with an American record company, who released his songs on 5 or 6 different labels. They didn't do well, unfortunately, though, and all this led to Lomax sadly dropping Leadbelly. He arranged to allocate his money in different intervals to his wife, because he was worried that Leadbelly would spend his money carelessly on drinking or partying. Unfortunately, Leadbelly wasn't appreciative of this, and decided to sue Lomax, getting all his money in one payment, and greatly hurting the relationship between the two, making John vowing never to work with Leadbelly again. In the middle of the court case, though, regarding the suing, Leadbelly actually tried to reinstate the partnership, but John was done. Although, around this time, Leadbelly actually went on to release his first album, which was, and excuse my censorship, but N-word Sinful Songs, which was released in 1939. This all started and came together from the past 3 years in which Leadbelly was performing 2 times a day at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. He played there so much and got so much attention there that he was selected to be included in an issue of Life magazine while it was in its infancy, and he was remarked by the phrase, "Bad N-word makes good minstrel." Obviously, that's not appropriate now to say so publicly and say when, talking about an African American person. However, at the time, it was slightly more accepted, and people weren't necessarily, using it as derogatorily. Leadbelly's career was still not picking up, though, despite this feature, and it was only in 1939, when he was sentenced to prison again, did son of John Lomax, Alan, pick him up and helped him release his first studio album, N-word Sinful Songs, which was a folky blues album that took a lot of his recordings with John and just pressed them. On this album, there's a few songs worth checking out. I recommend Go Down Old Hannah, which is a soulful ballad about the sun that uses the natural underproduced rusticness as a tool. As well, I'd recommend Poor Howard. It features his signature 12-string guitar. It delivers a potent message in a short amount of time. And it has a lot of influence being covered by Robert Plant and somewhat adapted by Jim Morrison and The Doors when writing their song about Otis Redding. The Gallus Pull, obviously a very famous song released by Led Zeppelin, was slightly adapted from this. And it's a pretty good song in itself, despite the slightly worse production. However, this album has a few plights, featuring not a lot of great songs on the other half. And I'd honestly call these tracks filler, which is a weird word to use because it's kind of a modern word. However, they do definitely exist and they weaken the record. All in all, though, it's pretty good, and I'd say it's a classic and probably the essential Leadbelly listen. In the following year, 1940, he went on to release his second album, The Midnight Special and Other Prison Songs. In this album, he recruited the Golden Gate Quartet to help provide backing vocals and recreate the sound of prison convicts just chanting. This album's a prison album. It's not necessarily easy listening, and it's not really made for casual listening either. Despite this, it has two really great songs, that being The Midnight Special and the other one being Alabama Bound. The Midnight Special is probably my favorite song by Leadbelly, and it has a rich meaning, and it's just a beautiful song in general, speaking to everyone who's in the headlights of freedom, hoping it will shine upon them. And like I mentioned before, Alabama Bound is definitely also worth checking out, utilizing the Golden Gate Quartet probably to its fullest on the album, and having complex lyrics about returning home from the big city. The following year, Leadbelly was a little more down on his luck, having to sell to play big birthday parties for kids. This wasn't all too bad since it seemed like he somewhat it. How you won't be able to tell that by listening to this album. He really sounds like he doesn't want to be doing it, and I wouldn't recommend any of them. And despite that, his songs weren't so great, it actually sold pretty well, selling 492 copies in the release year, garnering him a little bit of money to continue recording. After that, in 1942, he released Work Songs in the USA, which was recorded with his new producer and partner, Mo Ash, in January, and resulted in disappointing sales numbers. He also registered for the draft at 53 years old, and because of this, he obviously wasn't selected. On this album, there are once again 6 songs, with only 2 really standing out, those being Rock Island Line and O'Reilly, which are both solid tunes, with relatable and melancholy, yet empowering meanings. Both some of his faster tempo songs, which I think he excels with personally, and honestly, I think if he employed that tactic into a lot of his recordings, they would be slightly more enjoyable. In 1944, he released his next album, which was simply titled Songs by Leadbelly. This was his first album where he was working with Capitol Records, and he was living with a studio guitar player at the time. On this album, it has some of the similar flaws of his previous ones, being that it's inconsistent with only a few good tracks. However, the good tracks on this album are great, with Good Morning Blues employing nice harmonicas. It's just a solid blues tune. It's got bad production, but it kind of highlights the vocals, so it works. It's also got Irene, perhaps one of his most famous songs, along with Titanic and a few others. But Irene is the mythological song that's so called got him out of jail, which is a nice myth, but apparently it's not true. Regardless, it's a slow, beautiful tune, and definitely worth checking out if you want to get into Leadbelly. It's also got John Henry, which is one of my more liked songs on the album. I think the lyrical content's average, but it's got some cool harmonica, And in my opinion, it sounds like a young Bob Dylan, and I'm a huge Dylan fan, so that's pretty cool. 2 years later, in '46, he released his sixth album, N-Word Folk Songs, which is top-heavy but inconsistent. On this album, he brings in more instruments, displaying his first use of piano on the studio albums. And a couple songs here to check out, I'd say, are John Hardy, Borrow, Aaron, Go, Meeting at the Building, Bring Me a Little Water, Sally, and Noted Rider. All really good songs. However, the rest of the album kind of let it down. All in all, though, I'd say this is probably the second one you should check out. Second album you should check out if you like Leadbelly. In 1947, he released his last album while alive, entitled Midnight Special. This album was short and featured only songs that he had released on albums before, so I'm not going to go into particular detail about it, since a lot of the things I have to say about it were mentioned in the previous parts where I talked about other albums. However, unfortunately, and only 2 years after this, Leadbelly would tragically die of Lou Gehrig's disease, and he died in New York City. It's especially sad since in that same year, 1949, his career was starting to be on an incline, having a regular radio show called Folk Songs of America, which aired on Sundays on WNYC. He was buried in Shiloh Baptist Cemetery at Murraysport, Louisiana, where there was a statue that was erected of him a few kilometers away. Leadbelly also had a few posthumous releases, including the Library of Congress recordings, which was a 6-volume series that included the Midnight Special, Gwine Dig a Hole to Put the Devil In, Let It Shine on Me, The Titanic, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, and Go Down Old Hannah. There's also the Folkways recordings, which is more so centered around his work with Moses Ash, which included Where Did You Sleep Last Night, Burgwa Blues, and Shout On. Along with this, there were some live recordings and a few Smithsonian collections that were released. There was also some mythology surrounding Leadbelly. First of all, with his name. There were many different accounts of how he got it. Some people say it was his physical toughness. Others say it was that he was wounded by a buckshot that he was shot in the stomach with. Others say it was his uncanny ability to drink. And some people even say it was his tendency to lie. However, it was never outright clarified which one it was. As to who he was influenced by, I couldn't really find a whole lot on this, but I'm guessing he took some stuff from someone like Big Blue Brunzier, other folk/blues singers that were popular at the time. As to who he influenced, man, it's just about anybody. We've got a huge list of people, and I probably don't even have them all here. So far, I've collected Bob Dylan, Robert Plant, Eric Clapton, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Van Morrison, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Ram Jam. But he's probably gone to influence just about any rock artist or blues artist of the past decade, honestly. So his influence is definitely widespread. All in all, people report Leadbelly as being a pretty amiable guy, despite his violent actions. And as for rock and roll and blues, he was essential as a figure, and his legacy will always be remembered. Anyways, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode.